Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Where's the water? You guys are, you're slipping. Anyway. So, were you really going to bring that? Is that what you were getting ready to do? I'm just kidding. Oh, well, thank you. I actually like it over here on this side. Thank you guys so much it's great to be back here with all of you, and great to be here back as I am every weekend in Florida. We travel so much, sometimes we forget where we are, so it's just great to be here in Jacksonville today. And I'm joking. I'm joking. I know this is Ocala. I wouldn't really. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I want to just, for a moment, recognize your chairman, Senator Tom Lee, and the wonderful work he does, both in the state Senate. I told him he's a masochist to go back into that process again after being out of it. But the truth is, and something a lot of people don't know, and they should, Tom Lee supported me early in my campaign. You know, a lot of people that have been involved in Florida politics and kind of played it safe, you know, running against the governor of your state happens to be in your own party at the time. I know what party he's in now. He's moving around. But the point is that he was... But back then he was a Republican, and Tom Lee stepped forward and endorsed me in that race and was very helpful. In fact, was one of my chairs around the state that really helped me early on get some real credibility, and I will always be grateful. We're glad that he's back in the process, and we look forward to not the way he'll serve Florida in this new capacity, and who knows, maybe in some other capacities in the future. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it very much. Debbie, thanks for hosting this. You too were instrumental in our race and gave me so many opportunities when I was an underdog to speak. I know sometimes people ask you, why are you inviting this guy that's 50 points down? Back when I used to come and speak here on several occasions, and I will always be grateful. And true to form, and this is a great event you put on tonight, and thank you for inviting me and for having me here with you. It's good to start early with the one. Now, a couple more points I want to make. Your congressional delegation does a phenomenal job, and in particular the two members who are here tonight. Tom Rooney is a real leader. In fact, did something very unselfish last year when the redistricting process came up. He agreed and allowed himself to, he was very flexible, let's put it that way, in the way the district that he ran in. I mean, obviously he didn't draw the districts himself, but when people would ask him, he said, look, I just want to serve, and I'm willing to serve the people of Florida any way they draw the lines. And what he did was unselfish, and he is doing a phenomenal job. I want you to know he is a very special member of the United States Congress. Tom Rooney's a great, great representative. By the way, someone who endorsed me early as well. And he was a sitting member of Congress, and I'll let him tell you the story about the phone call he got from the sitting governor, who basically called assuming you're on my team, right? And he said no. And there was a long pause and silence, and it took some real guts to do that. He had just been elected, but he did it based on principle, and I'm grateful that he's a friend and someone that I call a colleague, and I'm grateful to have him. And Dennis Ross is someone I served with in the Florida legislature. In fact, I talk about Dennis in my book because he was, at one point, my competition for Speaker of the House, and you have no idea how lucky you are, Dennis, not to have gone to him. All kidding aside, it was an honor to serve, but he is someone that I looked at the time and said, this is a person who our colleagues admired and really looked up to, and became a member of our leadership team, and now, of course, serves in the Congress of the United States, but was a supporter of mine as well, and is doing a phenomenal job, and I think you've introduced me now 3 times in the last month at events, and he keeps getting better. I'm going to take him with me on the road, because, but I really appreciate the leadership you're showing in the United States Congress and the work he's doing on behalf of this community in our state. Thank you for your friendship, Dennis. There's a lot of things we could talk about tonight, and I certainly think that the issue that Dennis mentioned is not a popular one everywhere, but it is an important one. And my nature, when I ran for the United States Senate, and I came before the people, and I asked them to vote for me, I said, I want you to vote for me because I think this country is headed in the wrong direction. And I want to do something about it. I don't just want to be against things that are bad. I also want to fix things that are wrong. And that's why I've taken on this issue. And I really had planned to speak about it extensively tonight, and I'm willing to do so with any of you that want to do so personally. But the events of the last 6 days have really affected me personally. And I wanted to talk to you about that tonight instead. Because what we've seen over the last 7 or 8 days, and I don't, let me clarify that. I am not being audited by the IRS. I don't mean it that way, that I know of. Not yet, right? No, there's still time. No, the events of the last 7 or 8 days have really shaken me, as they have a lot of the people in this country. And let me explain to you why I mean that. Because I'm trying to make sense of all this and what it all means for our country, and what it means beyond just the singular issue of the IRS or Benghazi or the Associated Press. And this really speaks to the core of government's role in our country and government's role in our lives. And I think it all begins by recognizing, by the way, and I've said this publicly before, that I don't think these things happen pure by accident. I honestly believe that, I think both parties to some extent, but this president and this administration in particular have created a culture of politics that led to this. And what I mean by the culture that leads to this is, you know, when you go around demonizing your opponents, when you go around unwilling to accept that there is such a thing as an honest disagreement on the issues, when you go around telling people, our opponents politically, they're not just wrong, they're bad, it creates a culture. And when you're the president of the United States, when you're the governing party in a country, it impacts the people that work for you in government and in every agency in government. And you've seen this over and over again. So if you don't agree with those who want to redefine marriage, and I respect people's opinions, but they don't. If you don't agree with them and their definition, then you're a bigot. If you don't agree, or they don't agree with you that life begins at conception, then you're a chauvinist that's waging a war on women. If you don't agree with their particular ideas on immigration, then they accuse you of being anti-Hispanic. You know, if you don't agree with their plans to raise taxes and grow government, then you're only in it for the rich and you don't care about the people who are trying to make it. This is the culture that they've created. This is the narrative of their campaign. He obviously couldn't have run for re-election on a lower unemployment rate. He couldn't have run on a lower debt. He couldn't have run on an economy that was growing. And so he had to, the only way they could win is by literally dividing the American people against each other. By convincing people that the only way you could be better off is if someone else is worse off. By telling people that the reason why you're struggling is because someone else is doing too well. By pitting people against each other in a way that perhaps no other figure in the last 20 or 30 years has used the power of the presidency to do. And I'm going to tell you tonight, I say that with the highest possible respect. And I know that's what people always say before they insult you, right, with all due respect. And then, but I really mean that. I respect the presidency. I respect people that hold themselves up. I'll tell you right now, I don't agree with Barack Obama on the issues he stands for. I happen to believe he's a good father and a good husband and a pretty good golfer, apparently. And also, but I also think that, a lot of practice. No, but seriously, I have no qualms with the man. I don't know him, but I don't have a problem with him. This is not personal. Nor do I like, by the way, to engage in partisanship for the sake of it. I say these things to you because I honestly believe that they've created this culture in politics where the only way that you can win arguments is by convincing people, not that the other side is wrong, but that the other side is evil, that the other side is bad. And when you create that culture in your government, it's going to impact the people that work underneath you. And so that's why the National Labor Relations Board goes after Boeing, because they decide to move their plant from the state of Washington to the state of South Carolina because they didn't cut a deal with the union in Washington. That's why donors to the Romney campaign were attacked on the Obama website, and 2 weeks later were getting audited personally and in their business. And that's what leads to this circumstance that we are seeing now. And so this is, but I want to go even beyond that, because yes, there is a aspect to this that has to do with that, but it really goes even further and actually speaks to the core of what this party is about, what the conservative movement has always been about. This nation was founded on an ideal that we just kind of say nowadays, and I think for those of us like myself and most of you who were born and raised here our whole lives, we have a tendency to take this for granted. This idea that the founding principle that all of us are born equal, that God gives every human being certain rights. I know we say that now very loosely, but I want you to understand, I think you do, that that idea is pretty revolutionary. It certainly is not the idea that's governed the world throughout its history. It's not an idea that's accepted now. In fact, for much of human history, people were told that you could only grow up and be whatever your parents did for a living. You were born in a certain station in life, and that's the only thing you can ever be. That is the state of human history for almost every person that has ever walked the earth. America was founded on this principle, though, that every human being, everyone, didn't matter if your parents were rich or poor, connected or unconnected, every single human being on the planet, not just those born in North America, had certain rights given to them by God, and in fact went on to say that the very purpose of government is to protect those rights. Not to give you those rights, not to tell you what those rights were, not to award you these rights, but to protect them. In fact, the very legitimacy of government depended on it. Any government that denied you these God-given rights was an illegitimate government. That is the core of the Declaration of Independence. That's what it says. They didn't want to break away from England, by the way. They had no choice, because they believed that the crown was denying them their God-given rights. This is in the essence, at the core, in the soul of what this nation is all about. And because the founders believed that, they believed that government's powers had to be limited. They looked at the history of mankind and they said, look, throughout human history, no matter who was in charge, ultimately, powerful governments ended up oppressing people. Because while our rights come from God and they're natural, giving people freedom and liberty is not part of human nature. Human nature is to try to impose on others. Human nature is to ultimately have a majority try to tell a minority what they can or cannot do. This is the story of mankind for much of its history. And the founders understood that. And so what they said is, we are going to create a government, and the role of this government is to protect our liberties, the liberties that come to us from God. And the only powers that this government can have are the powers that we allow them to have, the powers that we express them to have, the powers that we specifically delineate. In essence, if we don't say you have it, don't assume you do. And so when we examine this issue, this is really what's at the core of all this. Now, we say these things as a people that perhaps maybe, I think, sometimes take that principle for granted, and I'll tell you why. Because this is all we've ever known. Most of us here have never known anything but liberty. Most of us here have grown up our whole lives in a country where you can say anything you want. Most of us are used to living in a place where you can come together here tonight to criticize the leader of your nation and not have to worry that a police officer is waiting for you on the other side of that door for speaking your mind. But I think the problem is that we've taken that for granted. I think the problem is we've taken that for granted. I think sometimes many people in this country have forgotten that that's rare. That what we have now, even in this 21st century, is rare. Now, before I say this, I want to be very clear of the people here from the press. I am not comparing this administration to the government in Venezuela. But I'm going to give you an example of something that just happened yesterday. In the 21st century, the guy who took over for Chavez, who won a fraudulent election, admitted that he knows who the 900,000 people are that voted against him, who were members of his party. Basically admitting that there's no secret ballot in Venezuela. And he admitted that because he slipped out of anger. The truth is, this happens all over the world. All over the world, the people in charge use the power of government to intimidate and harass their political opponents. And what makes us different and special is that here, we don't accept that. We're not supposed to do that. It is unconstitutional to do that. And in many ways, that's why we fight. That's why we're conservatives. That's why the Tea Party movement, for example, took life in 2009. Because people believed that that was being threatened not just by Democrats, but by government itself, no matter who was in charge. By the belief that government had grown too large and too powerful, and that history teaches us that when government is too large and too powerful, no matter who's in charge of it, it will lead to abuses. And so our critics will say, you guys just have a personal problem. You don't like Barack Obama. 7 years ago, nobody in this room knew who Barack Obama was. It's not personal against President Obama or anybody else. What allowed this movement of people to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore, is the fundamental belief that government, under both political parties, if we want to be fair, had grown to a level that was unsustainable. Economically unsustainable, because it was spending more money than it was taking in, and unsustainable to our liberties. And so as much as anything else, that's what defined the Tea Party movement in 2009 and 2010. And to be frank, that's what led me to run in that race where I was 35 or 40 points down. Everything I knew about politics said I was going to lose. Everything. I didn't know how I was going to raise $10,000, much less $10 million. I didn't know how I was going to find votes. I didn't know how I was going to convince people in this community to abandon someone who had been their native son, born and raised among you. I don't hold that against you. I know people are looking at me funny. My point is, everything I knew about politics told me you can't win that race. But I fundamentally believe that this country was headed in a direction that would rob us of the things that made us special and that made us different. And so that's why we fight. It isn't for the sake of it. It's because what's at stake is so incredible, so monumental, so historic. What we fight is this effort to redefine the role of government in our lives and therefore to redefine our country. The notion, the idea, not a new one, it's an old idea, a tired one, that somehow the next new law or new government program is going to solve the most pressing problems of our time. By the way, this is an example of why Obamacare is a disaster. The goal of Obamacare, at least the stated goal of it, is a noble one, right? Everybody should have health insurance so they can go to a doctor and be treated. It's the solution that fails. The solution was, here the federal government was going to use its power and your money to step in and solve this problem for us. No one here would dispute we have a health insurance problem in America. But what they've done will make it worse. In October of this year, Medicare Advantage recipients like my mom will get a letter in the mail explaining to them that they will have their benefits reduced significantly. And it will be because of Obamacare. And by the way, the government has issued a gag order. It has told the insurance companies, you can't tell your customers that before October. So many people don't even know. Later this year, many small businesses around this country will sit down with their accountant, their lawyer, or I don't know who, and they'll explain to them, next year, this is what you're going to have to do. This is what you're going to have to provide your employees if you have more than 50. This is what you're going to have to do. This is how much you're going to have to pay the IRS if you personally don't have health insurance. In January of this year, when people get their renewal notice for their insurance that you have and you like, people are going to be shocked at how much more expensive it's gotten. It's going to be a disaster. And while some of us politically may look at that and say, well, that'll be good for the elections in 2014, maybe, but it'll be really bad for America, really bad for our economy. It will make every problem we have now worse. That's why we look at these efforts that this current administration has, where they come to people and they tell them, look, give us more power. We'll distribute the wealth. We'll make sure that the people we think are making too much money have a little less of it, and then we'll put it into government, and government will spend it to help you. And we fight against that, not because we don't want to help people who are trying to make it, but because we know that big government hurts the people who are trying to make it. It always has. The people who have made it, we have nothing against them. We hold them up as an example to the rest of us. I remember growing up as a child, my parents were never rich, economically rich. We had everything we needed. We didn't have everything we wanted. But we were blessed. I grew up in a strong and stable home where two working class parents were able to give us opportunities they themselves never had. But I don't ever remember my parents teaching me or telling me, look at those people that are so successful, and teaching me to envy them or to think that somehow they had done something wrong. On the contrary, what they always taught us is one day that can be you, if that's what you choose to do with your life. You can be anything you want because you live in a place where that's possible. But it's possible. But it's possible because we believed in limited government. Because we never believed the lies of the old world where people were convinced that somehow if government just had more power, it can make things better for us. Not because we don't want to make things better, but because it doesn't work. It never has. And it won't work now. In fact, not only will it not work, if we stay on that road, it will rob us of everything that makes this country different and special. It'll still be a powerful country. It'll still be a big country. It'll still be a rich country. But it'll be a lot like the other countries of the world where people come here to get away from. It'll be a lot like those places where people get stuck doing whatever their parents did for a living. It'll be a lot like those places where you basically could only go as far as your family before you had gone. And so that's why we fight. Because we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose what makes us different. We don't want to lose what makes us special. And I think it's also important to remember that what we have here, it's not automatic. The country we know, the country you grew up in, the country your parents left for you, the country you immigrated to, the country that's allowed you to accomplish dreams and things that were unimaginable to your own family just a generation ago. That country has to be maintained. It doesn't just continue on its own. The nation that we've known is the result of decisions and sacrifices that were made by generations before us. And that tells us that the country that we will have in the future will be the result of decisions we make or fail to make right now. And history's full of examples of countries that lose their essence. History's full of examples of nations and people that have lost their way. History is full of examples of civilizations that have gone in the wrong direction and in less than one generation lost everything that had made them special and unique in their time. That could happen here. It could happen to us if we don't do some things that we need to take care of right now. And that, as much as... And that's what's at stake right now. It's number one, we need to remember and realize how special what we have here truly is. We need to look around the world and realize that there's still nothing like this country on the planet. No one claims that it's perfect, but the great thing about America is it's always getting better. No one claims America's history is without blemish. No one claims that every problem we have now has been solved, but it's still better than any other place in the history of the world. And the truth is, and the proof is, that there isn't a single one of you who would trade places with any country on earth right now, even with all the problems and challenges that we face and have. So the first thing is we have to realize once and for all, and I say we, not you, you know this, but you need to always remind yourself, and more importantly your children, that what we have in America is not like what it's like in the rest of the world. This is not the way people live in other places. The rest of the world, most of the other countries on earth, you don't have the liberties and freedoms that we have here. In other countries around the world, there are real consequences to speaking truth to power. There are real consequences to standing up against those who are in charge. There's very little chance of being able to change the leadership of your country. What we have here is unique. And the first step in recovering all this and maintaining it and reclaiming it is to accept that and to understand it and to let it drive us in everything we do. And to remind our fellow Americans of how truly unique and special the American experience has been. The second part of that is we have to realize what it is that made us special. And what it is that makes us special as a country is not that God loves us more than he loves people in Belgium or France. What makes truly America special are these liberties that I've just discussed earlier with you. The notion that here we actually believe that every single human being has rights that are given to them by God. And when you believe that, then your economy reflects it through free enterprise that says, we don't care where you start out. If you have a good idea and you're willing to work hard, you have a God-given right to go as far as your talent and your work will take you. And here's what else makes us special. That while we understand we have to have a government, and that government needs to do a good job at what government's job is, the answers to our most pressing problems as a people has never resided in the Capitol, or in the White House, or in the Supreme Court, or in City Hall, or in Tallahassee. They have a role to play. But the answers to our fundamental challenges reside in us, in the obligations we have to one another, not as taxpayers necessarily, but as fathers and mothers, as parents, as neighbors, as members of our communities and churches and temples. It is there where lives are changed and the countries are formed. It is in civil society, not in government, where the nature and essence and soul of a country is formed. And the job of our government is to protect our liberties so that we can do it, so that we have the freedom to do what is right. And the last thing we have to do is we have to be willing to stand up and protect it. Not to get discouraged because we lost an election. Not to get discouraged because so many of our neighbors don't see things the way we do. Not to get discouraged because we think all the major newspapers and television networks are against us. Not to get discouraged because all the news every day is about how wrong we are, what a wrong track the party is on. But rather to stand up and understand that what we are fighting for is not just about winning elections. What we're fighting for is not just about having more members of Congress than the other party does. What we are literally fighting for is the identity of the greatest nation that man has ever known. What we are literally fighting for, is the definition of what it will mean to be an American in the 21st century. That's what we're fighting for. And in that fight, let me just tell you, it's not an excuse to simply sit around and rail against the administration. We should. We must be against all the bad things that they stand for. But we have to be about more than just that. We also have to have answers to the issues and the problems that real people face in the modern world. To the reality that our economy is not growing vibrantly. To the reality that too many of our people don't have the skills they need to fully succeed in the 21st century. To the reality that there is still evil in the world. That radical political Islam and tyrannical governments around the planet still aspire to do what tyrants and evil has always aspired to do, and that's oppress and crush other people. But all of that begins by making the decision that we do want to remain exceptional, that we are not content with America just being another country. That we understand that we have been blessed, but with those blessings comes a special obligation. Now, I don't know why it's us. I don't know why Providence has chosen America to be that nation, but it has. I don't know why God has blessed us with the resources that we have, both natural and human. I don't know why we've been put in this place, but we have. We have. Americans is not just a nationality. I believe it's a calling. I know that we are, as Americans, whether you were born or naturalized an American, we are but a handful of the fewest people in the history of mankind that have been given an opportunity to live in a place like the one we have. And with that comes an obligation, not that we can solve all the world's problems, but first and foremost is an obligation to serve as an example to the world, to prove that the lies of the old world, in fact, were lies, that you are not limited by where you started out in life. That every single one of us do, in fact, have a God-given right to go as far as our talent and our work will take us. And second, by doing what we can, when we can, around the world, to ensure that others have those rights as well. We can't invade every country. We can't fight every war. We can't be involved in every conflict. But every time tyranny faces off against freedom, America must always stand firmly on the side of freedom, every chance we get. And I am actually very hopeful about our future. I'm not just hopeful because I think we're going to win a lot of elections in 2014. I do actually believe that. But I'm hopeful because I actually believe our people do want to be special. And I know that there are voices out there that say, you know, maybe the American people have changed. Maybe we've reached a point in our history where Americans just want more government, where they've given up on trying to be different. Maybe there's been this change in our society, and this is all reflective of that. I know that there are some who voice that. I personally don't believe that. I don't. Even here tonight, as I was sitting here, one of the people working here handed me this note. It's in Spanish, so I'll save the translation. Suffice it to say that it's just a note of gratitude to America. He actually wrote it to me, but the gratitude's not to me. It's gratitude for America, for giving him the opportunity to live in freedom and to be able to realize his dreams. And I know that's still who we are. The last few years have been tough on people. People have lost their homes and their jobs and their businesses, and kids have graduated college with huge student loan debt, and now they can't find a job in the field they studied for. It's been a hard time for people. And it's not just because of policy in Washington, it's because the world economy has changed, and it's been disruptive. And sometimes when people are hurting, even people who want to be special, even people that believe in free enterprise and limited government, sometimes when life gets tough, people look around and say, you know, someone has to do something, and I don't know, maybe government can help. And I think that's what's happened to some people in America. Sadly, the problem is it isn't going to work. All these policies that the president has put in place are not going to work. I'm sad to say this, but they're going to fail miserably. And it will hurt America in the short term. But from that will emerge an opportunity once again. Because when, in fact, the full weight of these decisions and mistakes become apparent to our fellow Americans, they will turn and look for an alternative. They will turn and look for what else is or what can we do instead. And that's what we need to be ready for. And we don't have a hard argument to make. In order to sell our fellow Americans on limited government and freedom and liberty, all we will have to do is point to our history and compare it to that of the rest of the world. All we will have to do is look into our own lives and our own communities and our own families to see just exactly how special we have been and can continue to be. And I believe that ultimately that is the choice the American people will make. And I think it will start in 2014, and I believe it will continue beyond that. I believe that with all my heart, that that is what the American people still want to be. And now all they search for are some voices in our politics that not just say those things, but stand for those things and do something about them. Voices that fight for limited government and free enterprise. Voices that fight against the things going on at the IRS, not just because it's a Democrat in the White House. Voices that would be fighting against that if they were doing it to Democratic groups. The time is coming when the majority of the people in this country will look for an alternative to the disaster of the last 5 years. In fact, I think that time is here now. And what our country desperately needs now is a political movement that gives voice to that aspiration and solutions to these problems. And so you want to know what the road forward is for Republicans? Is to be that voice. The road forward for Republicans is to be that voice for those people that are looking to once again keep America special and exceptional and unique. That's what we're about. That's what this movement should be organized around. And it'll be more than just about politics. Because if we succeed not just in convincing the American people to follow us in a direction that doesn't just keep America the same way that it is. Our goal is not just to give our kids the America that we knew. Our goal is to give our kids an America that's even better than the one we knew. And if we succeed in convincing the American people to follow us, and once they give us that chance, if we put those ideas into practice and truly do what it is we say that we're about, then we won't be what Tom Lee talked about a moment ago, the first generation of Americans to leave their children better off. What we will be is the next generation of Americans who will leave their children what Americans have always left their children, the single greatest nation in the history of the world. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you so much.